So here we are, after a little bit of a break. I decided it's time to make another video, and oddly, it's proved to be quite hard for me to come up with anything original or special to talk about. I guess when you get in the habit of solitude, silence starts to come naturally, and if you're not careful, you can get caught in the rut of just having nothing to add. And yet life always does have something interesting to talk about if you just take a moment to think about it. And today I want to talk about a little bit about what's going on in the political space and my thoughts on that. And also I want to talk about credibility and what it means to live a life that is authentic. I was reading in The Economist recently an article that was about how we are experiencing a credibility crisis. And in short, what that means is that instead of trying to do things which create true credibility, we try to do things that make us look credible. And those are not the same. Have you ever noticed that sometimes two people can endeavor to do the same thing? They can have the same mission statement. They can have the same objective. They can deliver the same message. And yet the outcomes are dramatically different between the two individuals, because it turns out the content of your heart matters a lot more than you might realize. Feeling like something is pointless has an impact that you can't quite put your finger on. If you go out there and you try to do a task, but you believe right from the beginning, before you even start, that it's not worth it. Or if you try to help people, but you're not trying to help them as much as you are trying to fuel your own personal sense of ego. The point I'm getting at is it matters more why you're doing what you're doing than it does what you do. Recently, I had the privilege of going into a Walmart store in Bentonville, Arkansas. And that store is located directly across the street from Walmart home office. I'm from out of the area. I go into the store and I look around to see what's going on in there. And if you didn't know, I work for Walmart, so I have some idea of what one might be looking for or watching for when you go into a store. And what stood out to me was at this store, which is under the magnifying glass of scrutiny right across the street from headquarters, there's a lot of people in there doing things which aren't necessarily perfect. If I looked around, I could find somebody doing something that's not quite 100% the way it's supposed to be done. And yet, when I looked around, I also saw a lot more purposeful behavior than I probably would see in some of our stores further away from the eye of scrutiny. The point I'm getting at here is that when you know that you're being watched and you have that sense that there's an audience, you're more likely to do the right things. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do everything by the book. It doesn't mean that every single thing is going to be compliant with the letter of the law. But certainly, there's going to be a lot more compliance with the spirit of the law. You see, you're not going to do something that you believe is not in the best interest of the organization when the leadership of the organization is right there watching. And in life, we see there is this contrast between people who are proponents of the letter of the law. Think of your HR professionals. Think of the people that do their work in cubicles and they're far removed from frontline employees who have to deal with the actuality of complexities in the field. It's easy when you don't have to actually do the work to say everybody should just follow the rules, until you're on the front lines and you realize you can't always follow the rules in a extremely black and white way, because life is filled with exceptions to the rule. The human element isn't black and white. So you have to bend the rules sometimes. But then there's other people on the other side of the fence who are the anarchists at heart. The people who think the rule book should always be scrapped in favor of doing what you please. That you should always have your own interpretation, throw the culture out the window and do your own thing, write your own rules as you go. And that's a really toxic and dangerous attitude to have, because if you believe that you're above the law, you want to throw out the rules, then the underpinnings of what makes our society, our organizations great, the things that give us structure and guidance, those things we disrespect, and we lose something when we become glass half full sort of people, always saying, well, we shouldn't even try to follow the rules. So there's a need to have this middle ground, this place in between, where we sometimes bend the rules when it doesn't seem to be possible to make them fit in, because you can't have perfect rules to guide every single scenario in a diverse and imperfect world. But you also have to follow the spirit of the law, to try to be true to a higher culture, a sense of service to something greater than self. Now, as we look at everything going on in the political space lately, I think it's interesting how I always have tried to pride myself as a pragmatic liberal, as someone who was progressive, as someone who wants to see the world through a glass half full lens, as someone who believes in the efficacy and validity of the systems we have in place to look out for us. But then as COVID rolled out and things, there was a certain element of tyranny that showed up on the part of the left, and that was quite concerning to me. So I was inclined to vote for more conservative policies. And yet, as I look out at what's going on in the world today, in our national discourse and the politics of the day, I see a lot of the same problems cropping up on the right as those which I've seen on the left. You see, the problem is there's people who want to solve every problem with more rules, more regulation, and a father knows best kind of a government. And then there's people on the other side that want to tear down all of those institutions and do it their own way. But it's really just variations on a theme of extremism. People who want to go all the way to the right and embrace some sort of a pseudo-fascism, and people on the left who want to go all the way the other direction to push us into some sort of a pseudo-communism. Wisdom, though, is somewhere in the middle. Wisdom is respect for our institutions, but not unconditional reverence for them. It's being able to question things without trying to destroy every institution in favor of some new era of anarchy. And it's hard to look at the world with all of its polarizing extremes and pick a side. Because if you are a moderate, you'll look and ultimately realize that it comes back to that whole idea of following and respecting and cherishing the spirit of the law. Are we able to find a middle ground where we respect the values of the left and we respect the values of the right, and we find a way to get the best out of both worlds? That's difficult because people always like to say pick red or pick blue, and then that's going to be your team. But virtue lies somewhere between the two. And maybe politics is always going to be polarizing. Maybe people will always be a bit polarized. But I think it's important to talk about the question of why we do the things that we do. Because if we're trying to make the world a better place, honestly, truly, if we're trying to make our own lives better, if we're trying to serve something greater than ourselves, we'll tend to make the right judgment calls along the way. We'll tend to make reasonable decisions in an unreasonable world. And we'll tend to do a better job of overcoming our own weaknesses and shortcomings if we are transparent, if we live a life of absolute candor, always being an open book so that we're not living with skeletons in the closet. Never say something behind someone's back that you wouldn't say to their face. Never be too certain that you're right, and always be willing to self-examine. Always understand that you are a steward of something and not the owner of it. Because the truth is, we're not going to take anything with us when we die. We're going to live, and then we're going to be heading out, and someone else is going to pick up where we leave off. So why would you worry about the outcome of whether you get your way or not if you fully understand that it's not really your life anyway? It's a life that you're given to be a steward of for a period of time, hopefully a good steward of. And then you'll pass on that flame to someone else who will carry it after your time on earth is done. When you're trying to do something for the right reasons, then you are more likely to make the right calls. It doesn't mean that you'll see things through a lens of black and white. You'll sometimes go right, sometimes you'll go left. Sometimes you'll make good calls, and sometimes you'll make calls that aren't necessarily ideal. But the net positive will outweigh the negative when you do things for the right reasons. And instead of focusing on whether we're doing the right things, whether we have the right rule book to guide us, we really should probably look at something more spiritual. We should say, are we guided by the right spirit in our hearts? Are we living for ourselves only, or are we living for the cause greater than self? Very seldom will you really make terrible choices in life as a result of trying to do what's right in service to others. It's when we look inside, we worry about what people will think about us. We worry about whether we're going to come out on top. we worry about all of those things that tie in with ego, with pride, then we start to be self-centered. And then we worry about all of the wrong things, and we start doing things that are going to give us the appearance of credibility instead of actually building true credibility by not building our houses on the sand. There's a video out there of a house on stilts on the beach, and then the hurricane came in and it knocks the house over. I was looking at that and I was thinking, you know, you could say that there's a lot of things which might have been done to help keep that house from falling over. Maybe it could have been shored up better or something like that. But the great lesson is really not so much about building stronger, more fortified stilts, right? It's a lot more about not building your house on the sand. It's not about figuring out how to be perfect at everything. Nobody's perfect at everything. It's about being teachable. It's about being honest. It's about making a point to be coming at life from the right place. And when you do that, then everything gets a lot easier. And so what if somebody looks at you and thinks, well, you're not the best thing since sliced bread? I mean, really, does it matter? The truth of the matter is none of us are anything but temporary vessels making our way through a short jaunt through life. So let go of your pride, do your best at what you are doing, and be honest. Be honest about what you are, honest about what you're not. And don't worry too much about outcomes. Just focus on doing your best to do what you do for the right reasons. It was Judge Learned Hand who said, the spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too certain that it is right. And I think that that's a really invaluable thing. You know, we live in a time when people are so obsessed with being right, they, you know, even if they're not, they still want to make sure they come out on top. And then we wind up doing things that are disingenuous. We wind up doing things which maybe aren't completely honest. We wind up sacrificing our credibility for the appearance of credibility. And ultimately, in the end, water will always find its level. The truth always comes to light. And so it's better to build less, but build well on a foundation that's true and honest and meaningful, and always live your life doing things where if the world knew what you were doing, you wouldn't be particularly ashamed of it. And that's a good place to be. It's kind of like all the folks who spend their money on credit cards and they can't pay them off and they're in debt, but they have stuff that looks good. Well, who's really better off? The person who wears clothes from the Goodwill and doesn't have any debts, or the person who's underwater but they're driving a nice new car? Focus on principles that endure, and that's something we can all try to apply a little bit more in our lives. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time, thanks so much for watching.